In the summer of 1588, the fate of England, and perhaps of the world, hung on the winds of the English Channel. For decades, Catholic Spain and Protestant England had drifted toward open war. King Philip II, ruler of the mightiest empire on earth, saw Queen Elizabeth I as a heretic and a usurper. Elizabeth, in turn, had sanctioned piracy against Spanish treasure fleets and supported Protestant rebels in the Netherlands. The clash was inevitable. That July, Philip unleashed the full power of his navy, the mighty Spanish Armada, more than 100 ships, thousands of soldiers and sailors, and a single mission: to invade England, depose Elizabeth, and return the island nation to the Catholic faith. In our history, storms, miscommunication, and the fireships of Sir Francis Drake scattered the Armada and saved England from conquest. But what if they hadn't? What if the winds had favoured Spain and the Armada had done what it was meant to do? This is the story of an England that fell, of a Catholic empire that reached from the Andes to the Thames, and of a world forever changed. In our world, the Spanish Armada was doomed by delays, poor communication, and the unpredictable weather of the English Channel. But in this timeline, just one factor changes: the wind. In late July 1588, as the Armada sails up the English Channel, a critical weather shift never occurs. The fierce storms that scattered the fleet in our history simply don't come. And this time, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, commander of the Armada, manages to maintain formation and establish contact with the Duke of Parma in the Spanish Netherlands. Despite English attempts to block the rendezvous, the two forces coordinate. Parma's army, 30,000 strong, embarks on barges and crosses the narrow sea. England's coastal defences, unprepared for a full-scale landing, are overwhelmed. By August 4th, Spanish troops have come ashore in Kent. The English navy, caught off guard, fails to prevent the landing. Sir Francis Drake's fireships, so decisive in our reality, arrive too late. Inland, panic spreads like wildfire. Queen Elizabeth rallies what forces she can, but the country is divided between Protestants who will fight to the death and Catholics who see the invaders as liberators. Within 2 weeks, the Spanish army is marching on London. The English government teeters on collapse. Elizabeth's advisers plead with her to flee north, but she refuses, making a final speech at Tilbury that will be remembered in this world as a tragic last stand. By August 20th, London falls. With London occupied and the royal court in chaos, England's centuries-old independence crumbles in a matter of weeks. Queen Elizabeth I, once hailed as the Virgin Queen and a Protestant icon, flees north with a small contingent of loyalists. But support in the countryside is unreliable. Some local nobles remain loyal to the crown, but others, long silent, begin to declare for Philip II. In the north, old Catholic families like the Percys and the Howards rise again, throwing open their estates to the invaders. Elizabeth is captured outside York on September 4th, betrayed by a noble family once loyal to her father. Her captors deliver her in chains to London, now governed by Spanish generals and a council of hand-picked Catholic clerics. By October, a formal declaration is issued. England has been liberated from heresy. The Pope sends blessings. The Spanish Inquisition, re-established on English soil, begins purging Protestant officials, clergy, and educators. Elizabeth is put on public trial for heresy and usurpation. The charges are political as much as they are religious, supporting pirates, aiding rebels, executing Mary Queen of Scots. Her trial, held in Westminster Abbey, is a spectacle broadcast to the continent. She defends herself with passion, but the verdict is never in doubt. On November 2nd, 1588, Queen Elizabeth is executed by sword. She dies in silence, dressed in white, her final words reportedly a prayer in English, a language soon to be suppressed. The Tudor dynasty ends. The Protestant Reformation in England is decapitated. In her place, King Philip II of Spain installs his daughter, Isabella Clara Eugenia, as Queen of England, Reina Isabel I in Spanish parlance. She rules as a client queen, advised by Spanish envoys and loyal English Catholics. Her court speaks both Spanish and Latin. English is discouraged in education and banned in official documents. Across the country, a wave of forced conversions begins. Latin Mass is restored, Bibles in English are seized, and churches are rededicated to saints. Protestant clergy are exiled, imprisoned, or burned. Oxford and Cambridge are purged. A new generation of scholars is educated not in Reformation theology, but in the Counter-Reformation doctrines of the Jesuits. To the Catholic world, it is a triumph. To Protestant Europe, it is a catastrophe. When news of Elizabeth's capture reaches the continent, disbelief gives way to dread. Across the Protestant world, church bells toll not in celebration, but in mourning. The Queen of England is dead, the English Reformation crushed, and the greatest power in Europe, Catholic Spain, now controls the English crown. No one feels the impact more than Scotland. King James VI, son of the executed Mary, Queen of Scots, and heir presumptive to Elizabeth in our timeline, now finds himself in mortal danger. His mother's Catholic faith once gave him hope of Spanish favour, but now Philip II has bypassed the Stuart line entirely, installing his own daughter on the throne of England. James denounces the invasion, declares himself the rightful King of England and Scotland, and orders mobilisation of his forces. But Scotland is small and poor. Still recovering from decades of civil war, it cannot stand alone. So James turns outward, forming a Protestant league with Sweden, Denmark, and the Dutch Republic, a desperate coalition to resist Catholic encirclement. In the Dutch Republic, Spanish victory in England is a nightmare realised. For decades, the Protestant Dutch have fought Spain for independence. Now, the English ports that once supplied weapons and volunteers are closed. Exiled English Protestants flood into Zeeland and Holland, bringing tales of executions and forced conversions. Facing a two-front war, the Dutch bolster their dikes and their defences. In 1589, they signed the Treaty of Leiden with Scotland and Denmark, swearing mutual defence against any Catholic aggression. Meanwhile, France stands at a crossroads. In the throes of its own civil war, France has teetered between Protestant Huguenots and Catholic loyalists for decades. With Spain's triumph in England, French Catholics are emboldened. The moderate Henri of Navarre, a Protestant claimant to the throne, is assassinated in this timeline in early 1589, possibly with Spanish help. The French crown falls into the hands of the ultra-Catholic House of Guise, firmly aligned with Spain and the papacy. Europe's religious map begins to change. Protestantism survives in Scotland, Scandinavia, parts of Germany, and the Netherlands, but it is shrinking. Catholic Spain now controls Iberia, Italy, the Low Countries, and England. The Pope declares 1589 a Jubilee year, praising Philip II as the hammer of heresy. In Geneva, a young Protestant theologian writes bitterly, "The light of the Reformation is being snuffed out, one nation at a time. The 30 Years' War in this timeline may not be a war at all, but a long, slow extinction." For ordinary people, life in the new Catholic England changed in ways both subtle and brutal. In churches, the most visible transformation was immediate. Within weeks, Anglican services were outlawed, the Book of Common Prayer was banned, and priests who refused to recant were publicly tried for heresy. Latin Mass returned to parish churches. The King's men tore down English-language Bibles and defaced memorials to Protestant martyrs. In towns like Canterbury, Oxford, and Exeter, auto da fe ceremonies were held in the market squares, symbolic burnings of heretical books, followed by real burnings of unrepentant ministers. In schools and universities, the shift was even more profound. Oxford and Cambridge were purged of Protestant faculty. Their curricula were rewritten under the guidance of Jesuit educators, imported from Spain and the Low Countries. Students now studied theology from the Council of Trent, not Calvin or Cranmer. The English language began to disappear from the educated class. Latin and Spanish were made the languages of government, scholarship, and diplomacy. Even in the countryside, the Spanish presence was deeply felt. Spanish soldiers were garrisoned in every major town and port. Tax collectors, answering not to Parliament, which had been dissolved, but to Madrid, levied steep tithes for the crown and the church. English law was gradually replaced with Castilian legal codes. Trials were no longer by jury, but by ecclesiastical judges in robes. For many, especially in Catholic strongholds like Lancashire and Yorkshire. The changes were welcome, or at least tolerated. Old recusant families reclaimed lands taken under Henry VIII and Elizabeth. Monasteries began to reopen. Processions and feast days returned, and for the first time in decades, the Pope's emissaries rode openly through the streets. But not all complied. Protestant families who refused to convert found their homes seized, their children taken by church authorities for re-education, their men conscripted or imprisoned. A quiet exodus began. Tens of thousands fled across the North Sea to the Dutch Republic or to Scotland, forming a growing Protestant exile community abroad. In London and Kent, underground Protestant cells emerged, printing secret pamphlets and holding covert prayer meetings in barns and cellars. Culturally, England fell under the Spanish spell. Theatres were shuttered, deemed hotbeds of Protestant sedition. Shakespeare, Marlowe, and Johnson were forced underground or into exile. Portraiture and painting flourished, but under the influence of the Spanish Baroque, dark, devout, grandiose. Spanish became fashionable among the upper classes, taught alongside Latin in elite schools. Children of nobles learned to dance not English jigs, but the Spanish pavan. By 1593, a generation of young English nobles had never known a Protestant England. Some served proudly in Spanish ranks, others quietly plotted rebellion. The old world was vanishing, but the embers had not yet gone out. By 1593, England had been under Spanish rule for 5 years. For some, the new order was becoming normal. For others, it was becoming unbearable. Small-scale resistance flickered in the north and west, mostly disorganized, easily crushed. But underground Protestant networks grew more sophisticated. Exiled English nobles in Scotland and the Dutch Republic financed smugglers to bring forbidden English Bibles, pamphlets and letters into port towns. Hidden presses clattered in cellars from Norwich to Bristol. In 1595, a failed uprising in Cornwall, led by Protestant yeoman farmers, briefly captured a Spanish garrison before being violently put down. Over 400 men were executed in the aftermath. The Cornish Rising, as it would later be called, became a martyr story told in whispers and eventually songs. Meanwhile, Queen Isabella Clara Eugenia, now a fluent English speaker, continued to govern as a Spanish client monarch. She married her cousin, Archduke Albert of Austria, and the two ruled from a court in Windsor, blending Habsburg ceremony with Anglican architecture, an uneasy fusion of worlds. Then, in 1598, the great architect of this new world died, Philip II of Spain, king of a Catholic Europe and conqueror of England. His death marked the end of the first act, but not the end of the story. The 17th century unfolds very differently in this world. The English Civil War never happens because Parliament had been abolished decades earlier. There is no Puritan Revolution, no Oliver Cromwell, no Glorious Revolution. There is no United Kingdom as we know it. Instead, the House of Habsburg consolidates its power in England, and through dynastic marriage links the thrones of England, Spain, Austria, and the Holy Roman Empire. The Protestant strongholds of Europe shrink, but become fiercely united, especially in the Dutch Republic, Scandinavia, and a more militant, independent Scotland under the Stuarts. Without Protestant England, there is no English colonization of North America. The eastern seaboard becomes a contest between Spain and France. The English language becomes a marginal tongue, used by exiles and peasants, while Latin and Spanish dominate in law, religion, and diplomacy. In this world, the Enlightenment emerges more slowly and differently, shaped by Iberian scholasticism instead of English empiricism. There is no Locke, no Newton, no Magna Carta mythology to inspire revolution. By the 18th century, what was once England is a fully Catholic, Spanish-speaking realm, its young people taught to revere saints instead of Shakespeare. The American colonies, if they exist at all, are likely Spanish or French, and there may be no United States. Instead, we find a world where Spain remains the dominant global empire well into the 1700s, a world less free, less pluralistic, but tightly unified by faith, family, and crown. History often turns on battlefields, but sometimes it turns on the breeze.